the government have strengthened the kind of flexible working rights in the last couple of years. So anyone as an employee can now request a more flexible way of working. There's too many people, including myself sometimes, who will sit at your computer screen for an hour with a sandwich next to you, and that's not good either.
No, try to avoid al desco. We all know striking the balance between work and life is hard. With hybrid working, it can be tricky to create boundaries where your professional time ends and your personal time begins. The way we're working is undoubtedly changing, and with flexible working and the 4-day week on the rise, there are lots of ways we can increase our productivity while avoiding burnout. I'm Iona Bain, and welcome to A Little Bit Richer, brought to you by Legal & General. Here to chat with me today about getting the right work-life balance is Joe Ryle from the 4-Day Week Foundation, the UK's national independent campaigning organisation that advocates for a reduction in the maximum working week from 48 to 32 hours by 2030, and for people to request a 4-day working week with no loss of pay. That's quite an ask. So to give us a bit more information about how that might work, welcome Joe. So we hear this term work-life balance a lot. What does it mean, and how do you think the definition has evolved over time?
We used to work 6-day working week 100 years ago.
So working on a Saturday?
And it took the best part of like a decade, 2 decades. They were like, progressive business leaders like Ford Motor Company in America, also trade unions pushing for this, and they won the weekend. I don't know, my personal take on it as someone who was working 5 days a week, 6 days a week, for a number of years, it didn't feel like a good balance.
And why do you think this whole topic of work-life balance has come to the fore in recent times? Because when I was younger, when I was starting out in my career, I did hear about a work-life balance, but it felt like quite a distant concept. It didn't feel like something that was really available to me, because the idea was you work hard, you get on, and you get your head down. So why do you think work-life balance has become a more, if you like, popular concept?
Yeah, so I think firstly, the COVID pandemic has been a catalyst for totally rethinking the way that we work. I think that's because we do have a unhealthy culture, which is a culture of being addicted to kind of really long working hours. The data does kind of speak for itself. We work some of the longest full-time kind of working hours across Europe, but at the same time, we have one of the least productive economies. So what that suggests is that all these long working hours we're doing not producing good results for the economy, and also not producing good results for workers.
I've definitely been coming across more cases of burnout in my career and in my life. Why do you think we are seeing more cases of burnout?
On a serious point, it is worrying that we do have millions of workers that are getting burnt out on a more regular basis. We have 3 million workers who are out of work, long-term sick, and I think there is a relationship there with this kind of long working hours culture we have. That it's not good for our well-being. I also think we've had this kind of explosion of technology, smartphones, which has created this kind of always-on culture where you sort of never switch off. You take your work to bed with you, you take it back home. If you're on your phone, you can respond at any point.
Yeah. So I mean, how would we define burnout?
It's basically it's around stress when you're just physically, emotionally exhausted, and we kind of measured that because when we ran the biggest pilot of a 4-day working week in the world so far, so it was 2022, we had 61 companies that took part, so it was about 3,000 employees that took part. There was a 71% overall reduction in burnout, so people were feeling a lot less stressed. I think there was a recent survey which came out, which was across Europe. I think it's 20 to 30,000 workers were asked about their motivations for what they're looking for from their job. And for the first time, work-life balance is higher than better pay. So actually, for the first time, workers across Europe are, when they're going into the workplace, they're looking for a work-life balance. Now, that's a significant shift. And I do think that's largely been driven by conversations that have happened since the pandemic that have forced us to change. And because it has been 100 years of 9 to 5, 5-day working week, and the world of work has obviously transformed since then. It's very different from that kind of more agricultural, more industrial era.
It's fascinating that people would put that work-life balance ahead of income, which you would imagine would solve a lot of people's problems, especially in the cost of living crisis and in this general economic environment. The feeling is that more money would be really, really helpful, and yet work-life balance comes ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you've got loads of money but no time, then you can't really enjoy your life, can you?
I think a really big question that's on people's minds at the moment is, are we going to see at some point a return to the full-time 5-day-a-week working model?
I don't think we're going back. I don't think, if you look at the kind of polling and survey data on this, no one wants to go back to 5 days a week in the office, I don't think. I do think we're moving forwards to a culture of work where workers have a bit more freedom, a bit more autonomy.
When I think back to the early part of my career, if I asked to, work from home 1 day a week, it was like, I was asking to be paid £1 million a year. It just seemed absolutely impossible. But now it does feel like that has become more normalised. I guess the concern is that there are those big employers that can basically say, well, if you want a job with us, you've got to come in 5 days a week, and that's all there is to it.
Perhaps for now they can still get away with that in some cases, but to normalise that workers can request a better balance in their lives where they've got more time for childcare, friends, hobbies, whatever it is in their life. But we are in a place where we've had decades and decades of a culture that's been addicted to work, and that's been put front and centre. We're at the very beginning of that shift. And if you look at also some of the survey data, it is the young generation coming through now who are saying, I don't want work to dominate my life in the same way that maybe it has done for their grandparents' generation, their parents' generation. So there is that cultural shift taking place, but it will take time. These things don't change overnight.
That's a very interesting shift because, as I said, in the early part of my career, it was all about hard work. And there will be people who will say that work is a joy. If you can find a job that you really love, then you'll want to go in and do it 5 days a week, and you'll want to work as hard as you possibly can. What would you say to that?
You can actually work harder in 4 days rather than 5. Spreading the working week over 40 hours, when workers are better rested, when they have a better work-life balance, you come back in a Monday morning refreshed, more motivated, and you can perform better. A rested worker is a better worker.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess there's always that concern that if you're trying to squeeze 5 days into 4, then actually that puts a lot of pressure on those employees then to kind of fit a pint into a quart bottle, if you see what I mean, and to try to fit more into less time. Could that cause more stress in the long term?
I think it's something we need to be wary of. And I'm not going to pretend everything about a 4-day working week is perfect. There will be downsides, and there may be some downsides there if workers need to figure out the kind of reframing of the work that they're doing.
And what are some of the downsides of a 4-day working week, and how could those be managed?
So definitely some of the downsides we hear about are like there not being enough time for kind of staff social, staff being together, kind of, that kind of social time. We have seen that managed by companies being really strict about, putting something in the diary like once every month or once every 2 months to make sure that does happen. There's certainly, industries and sectors where it is going to be more complex to implement. It's also about working differently. We often inherit ways of working that go back decades, and actually we found the kind of newer startup organisation entrepreneurs that are kind of newer are much more agile and able to adjust to something like a 4-day week much easier.
Is there a particular group of people, or are there particular groups of people for whom this could be quite a good model?
We think in the long term, the vast majority of the economy could shift to a 4-day working week. But we've been honest about the fact, it is going to be more difficult in certain sectors and certain areas of the economy. It will be more complex to implement, and we might have to be more creative about how we implement it. I do also want to stress that, working a 4-day week isn't just about kind of doing everything that you used to do in a 5-day week, but packing it into 4 days. It is that opportunity to work differently and to really look at the work that everyone's doing, bring the team together to work more strategically and work more effectively, and to get the rewards of people being better rested, and then being more effective.
So could we see a rise in things like job sharing, for instance? Could that be a potential solution to some of those challenges that you might face with a 4-day week?
I think we'll see more and more of that, and I think ultimately this wider conversation about flexible working, 4-day working week, what it's all about is that workers want more freedom and more autonomy from work, and that will probably happen in different ways. I think there will be job sharing, there'll be more part-time work. We've also got the elephant in the room as well as artificial intelligence, coming in, which is doing a lot of the tasks that we do in our day-to-day jobs. And so our argument on that was, well, if we want workers and people to benefit from AI, then we should all be having a shorter working week because it's doing some of the tasks that we used to be able to do.
So if you are keen to work fewer hours, what are the options available for you? How can you bring that idea of working more flexibly or working less with your employer? Because I can imagine it might be quite a tricky conversation to have.
The government have strengthened the kind of flexible working rights in the last couple of years. So anyone as an employee can now request a more flexible way of working. Now, that's not a kind of 4-day, 32-hour working week as we advocate for, but there's different versions of flexible working weeks that you can offer to get a week that is more balanced.
So let's chat through that, because it may be that a 4-day week would not be on the table for certain employees. A nurse, for instance, could there be other things that they could ask for instead that would help them achieve that balance and those boundaries in their life?
You can ask for job sharing, part-time work, compressed hours where you're doing the same amount of hours but over kind of a 4-day week. You can also ask for a 9-day fortnight, and actually increasingly we're seeing hundreds of companies move to 9-day fortnight rather than a 4-day week, which is halfway there, right? A 9-day fortnight. So they'll reduce the working hours, but they're doing 1 week, they're doing 5 days, and the next week they're doing 4.
That's interesting, because I haven't come across the 9-day fortnight as much, but maybe that's a bit more of a halfway house. Another question I have is that what are people spending that day off doing? I'm quite curious.
Yeah,
because I read about
question.
quite recently that there's been a big rise in the number of people kind of going to the golf club or going to the hairdressers or doing things that they would otherwise do on the weekend midweek. So a lot of these businesses within the economy are seeing a bit of a midweek boom.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite interesting, and it points to the fact that people maybe are making the most of that day off. But kind of what are you seeing in terms of how people are using that day?
I think it's a real mix. Some of the anecdotal feedback we get back is people just like doing their life admin, catching up on the things, as you say, they haven't had time to do in the week. In Valencia, the government trialled a 4-day week every Friday for a month. I think it was in April. It was interesting that study found that actually the kind of hospitality service sector really boomed on that Friday when everyone was having extra. So I do think there's real benefit, real benefits this for the kind of hospitality industry.
Mind you, I imagine in Valencia, just sitting outside with a coffee or a beer, it's going to be a bit more attractive than here in the UK, right?
Oh, these days it's hot in July and August.
Well, true. Yeah, you can make the most of it, I'm sure. So, Joe, what are the 3 simple things that someone can do to maintain healthy boundaries at work, whatever their working model is?
So I think a big one is being really aware of your screen time use, and trying to set some clear boundaries to when work starts and ends. And the danger of working from home is that actually it's less, those lines are so much more blurry. And also having time where potentially you put your phone away from your desk and you're just maybe you're not even checking your emails, you're just really focusing on the work that you need to get done. 2, take your annual leave, take your bank holidays. Workers have fought for those over generations. Take them and enjoy that time off, and also take a lunch break. There's too many people, including myself sometimes, who will sit at your computer screen for an hour with a sandwich next to you, and that's not good either.
No, try to avoid al desco.
Yeah, exactly. Get to the park.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Really thought-provoking and lots to consider. Thank you, Joe. I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, leave us a review, and help others get a little bit richer too. You can keep up with the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Legal and General. Thanks for listening. Until next time, see you soon.